Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Rocco and Kate, for allowing us this opportunity. This is the first time we've given a small presentation on this work, and we've planned a short-ish, I think, presentation. I'm aware that this is an hour-long session, so we wanted to leave good time for some discussion in the second half. That said, interruptions, particularly, there's only 11 of us, so interruptions are definitely good, clarifications and so on as we go. We discussed whether to try and go back and forth in the presentation. We decided it was easier if I talk, but Christophe is absolutely on hand, and maybe he'll save me with some of the difficult questions. He's first author on the work after all, so that's what he has to do. Okay, I'm going to share my slides. Okay, you can see my main slide, yeah? Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so, well, let's start by emphasizing the diversity of human communication. It's, you know, in a way, it's kind of an obvious thing to say, but it's worth just pointing out quite how rich and diverse human communication is, extending well beyond not just languages, but even canonical cases. So it's in our languages, language use. We also wink at one another sometimes, and sometimes we do that in secretive ways, hiding it from other people who might be around. We can shrug our shoulders, various other body movements. Sometimes we paint pictures to express ourselves, and in those pictures we paint people that are pointing up to the sky or gesturing down to the floor. There are these more marginal cases of information flow, such as between two dancers who making micro movements, not only to do the dance, but actually to coordinate their behavior with one another. There are exaggerated displays of enthusiasm or affection. There's fashion choices which express something of our attitude to the social world around us. There are graphs and figures which can much more efficiently do the job of words. You know, we say a picture paints 1,000 words. And then there are these marginal cases, quasi-linguistic, marginally linguistic cases, interjections and so on, such as which is phonemic but not syntactic. Okay, so there's lots of things going on. If you've looked at the preprint that this talk is based on, you'll see that what we want to advance is the claim that there is some unity. Underneath this diversity, there is some cognitive unity. Now, although the talk is based on the preprint, we're definitely not going to try and cover all the ground. It's a big paper. Where we decided it's better to do one thing well, so we're going to focus in on one particular aspect. And that's the graded distinctions in human communication. A lot of the paper still deals with evolutionary issues. We're not going to talk about them today. Obviously, we're happy to do so in discussion if you so wish. Okay, so to motivate these graded distinctions, let's give a few examples. So one is hidden authorship. So hidden authorship kind of goes to the opposite extreme from prototypical cases of communication. So imagine a dinner guest who would like some more wine, but she has decided, or she believes, that it would be impolite to ask directly the host for more wine. So she waits until the host's back is turned or the host is otherwise distracted. And then she moves her empty wine glass to a conspicuous location, maybe in the middle of the table. And then she just waits until the hosts turn around again, or their attention is now back on the table, and they notice that the glass is empty and they fill it up. So the dinner guest has an informative intention towards the host. They want the host to understand that their glass is empty, but they don't show that, they don't really manifest that informative intention. They simply put the information out there. That's not the right way to put it, put the information out there. They behave in a way that allows the inference to be drawn by the host. They hide their authorship. Christophe, we were talking about this, and Christophe pointed me to an example given to him by his daughter. Is your daughter, Christophe, yeah? Not one of your sons, I think?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So this is a window with some railings on it over it, somewhere in France. And people have started using it to put their trash in it. That's what people do, right? So it is, in the first instance, just a window with some trash in it. But then somebody has decided, somewhat humorously, to add a little panel here. And this panel says, in French, "Our remains, 2021, anonymous co-creation," and then describes the materials that are inside the window. So it's just a thing in the world. It's not meant, the window is not informative or communicative, the litter is not informative or communicative in any ordinary sense. But then somebody's decided to play with things and sort of suggest that there might be some relevance in interpreting the litter in the window as in some way or another. They're doing what art galleries do. So there are links here with a couple of lines of research that draw on relevance theory approaches to talk about art institutions and suggesting that they co-opt the cognitive capacities that relevance theory describes for interesting ends in the art context. So some work I did with Scott Mitchell and in particular Kate McCallum, who some of you will know, and also Bigniocchi has been doing this work of this sort for some years now with several papers. Okay, so there's two non-canonical forms, but actually several. So we have ordinary communication. In ordinary communication, both an informative intent, what you want your audience to know is present, and the communicative intent. It's manifest that you have an informative intention towards your audience. In cases of deception, both of these things are also present. The distinctive thing about deception is that the informative aspect is deceptive. In cases of hidden authorship, there's still an informative intention, and what's distinctive here is that the communicative intent is hidden. So that's different to deception. It's not lying, right? But it's hiding the fact that you are trying to communicate with someone. You can also think, and this is where we start to get into graded distinctions, about cases of absent authorship. So in absent authorship, it's not that you actively hide that you have an informative intention, but perhaps you don't openly advertise it. So here I think of, for instance, I'm in the supermarket and the cashier is scanning my goods. Well, I put my credit card on the little platform that you have there sometimes. And it's not that I want to openly advertise that I'm going to pay with my credit card, but neither do I hide this fact. The information is, or the inference is there to be drawn because the stimulus has been produced that invites the inference that I'm going to pay with my credit card. But I haven't announced that fact by saying anything or showing it up to the cashier. It's just unannounced. The litter in the window is a case where just the litter in the window, there's no informative intent, there's no communicative intent, it's just a thing in the world. The humorous thing is that somebody has decided to play with this and to ask the question, well, if we pretend that this litter has been put there as if there is an informative intention, or maybe even as if there was a communicative intention, do we derive any relevant inferences off the back of that? And indeed, the label that they put there, "our remains," sort of starts to suggest the line of inference that a viewer or an audience member could take. So we get these non-canonical forms. Christophe and I think that these cases motivate thinking about, as we said, graded distinctions in human communication. Now, I'm just going to take this opportunity to describe an experimental study. Most of the talk is theoretical, but I'm just going to briefly describe an experimental study to further motivate things. It's about hidden authorship. It's work I did some years ago now when I was in Mike Tomasello's lab for a few months, looking at whether infants can engage in a hidden authorship to some degree or in some ways. So what happens here is that the infant who's here, or in the video, in the photo here, sitting just here, they come into the room with experimenter one, who's this person or this person, and they see this box. This box has holes in it, and these holes, they're shaped like a hat and like a car and so on, so recognizable shapes. Oh, it's the hiding and finding game, and the infant learns where all the objects are and will find them. And then the infant gets told the experimenter two is coming and she wants to play the game too, so we have to put these objects back, and they're put behind here, behind this screen here, under objects and so on and so forth, underneath this row. And then experimenter two comes in and she says, oh, it's the hiding and finding game, I want to play the hiding and finding game, but I don't like it. And then what she says depends on the condition. Either I don't like it when anybody helps me, which means she wants to do it on her own. Or I don't like it if I can't complete it. So, help is possible in that case. And then the infant is asked to sit down next to the screen. And then experimenter 2 goes about finding the toys, and she finds some, but then she fails. And she keeps her back turned and she's talking to herself, oh, where is the ball? I can't find the ball. Where could it possibly be? The ball is behind the screen and the infant is sitting next to it. So the question is, what does the infant do to help, if anything? Do they show the ball? Are they ostensive? Do they use language? Do they grab the experimenter's attention? Or perhaps in the condition where the experimenter doesn't want any help, perhaps they try and engage in hidden authorship. There's more to say, and I'm not going to go into any more details. The headline is that yes, they do engage in hidden authorship in the no help condition. So in attempts to suppress their communicative intentions per child are much higher at both age 3 and age 5 in the no help condition rather than the want help condition. So more to say about that, and can do questions at the end if you want. The key point is that even at that early age, infants are able and willing to differentiate these two important aspects of communication, the informative aspect and the communicative aspect, certainly in production. I dare say in comprehension too, but we haven't got data on that. Okay, so I mentioned this for 2 reasons. First, I think it forms part of the evidence, and it's now a very large body of evidence. That's just one small part for early emerging competence in communication. Many people have contributed to that body of work: Elizabeth Bates, Susan Golden-Meadow, Mike Tomasello, Gergo Chibra, Yuri Gergely here in Budapest. And I think, I think it's pretty clear by now that there is a robustly emerging competence, what I would call part of the ordinarily developing human cognitive phenotype, a competence in communication that emerges early in life, before age 3. The case of hidden authorship also motivates some important distinctions, which we've touched on already. And now I want to elaborate a bit more on those. Okay. So in cases of ordinary communication, as I said, the informative intention and the communicative intention are both made manifest to the audience. And in cases of hidden authorship, the informative aspect is still there, but the communicative aspect is hidden. What Christophe and I would like to suggest is that this is not a categorical distinction, but a graded one. That's to say that the communicative aspect can be present to different degrees in each case. Now, you could put various different words here. One obvious word to put in this gap here is showing. The philosophical literature on showing is large, and we're not going to attempt to review it here. But that's perhaps one way to think about these graded distinctions. So in some cases of showing, where are my keys? And somebody just puts the keys in front of me. Maybe they do it with a bit of exaggeration and a bit of, advertising their communicative intent, but maybe they don't, right? Maybe they just put the keys in front of you. So the communicative aspect can be more or less present in different cases. Maybe they're not looking for their keys. Maybe they've forgotten their keys, and then you have to show that here, this is where they are. Or maybe you do it, as I say, with a bit of exaggeration. Maybe that hints at some further inferences about how forgetful you are, and so on. Different cases can have the communicative aspect more or less present in each case. The same perhaps is true on, so there's the point. On the production side, there can be graded variation in the extent to which actors, communicators, at least at one end of the scale, actors can make their informative intentions manifest. So that's one graded distinction. And we're going to put that distinction orthogonal to another one, which I'll introduce to you now, and that's on the audience side. So to what extent does recognizing that the actor has an informative intent actually contribute to interpretation? So in canonical cases, particularly in linguistic communication, key insight, going back to Grice, that recognizing the informative intention is a predicate, is a basis on which to derive the intended meaning. There are cases when there is no informative intention, such as the litter in the window, and as such, it cannot play. It cannot contribute to interpretation in any way. But perhaps there are cases where, I reckon the role, an informative intention is recognized, but it does not play a complete role in deriving the inferences intended by the actor. And in fact, in some cases, maybe we derive inferences based on a communicative behavior that weren't intended by the actor. Right? So I recognize you have an informative intention about this, but it's not necessarily about that. We could say here, as we said, showing on the other case here, you could say seeing what is shown. So when I see what is shown, to what extent do I make my inferences off the back of recognizing that you showed me? I mean, if I'm just looking for my keys and you put the keys into my visual field, maybe there's no special inferences that follow. Or maybe in some cases there are, depending on the specifics of our relationship, the previous context and so on. So here too, there can be graded variation in the extent to which audiences interpret behavior based on recognition of an informative intention. So we have two graded distinctions here. And what we'd like to further suggest is that these two distinctions are orthogonal to one another. So on one axis, graded distinction, variation in the extent to which actors make their informative intentions manifest. And on the other side, variation in the extent to which audiences interpret behavior based on recognition of an informative intention. And in our prototypical cases of communication, most obviously language use, but others too, pointing, nodding, very overt cases. They belong in the top right quadrant here, and that's what we study generally. That's what most research on communication is based on, arguably. There's a whole big space here, and we think that humans exploit this space in interesting ways. That's what we're going to go on to talk about in a moment. I think this is a good point, because we're going to now talk about the exploitation of this space, to pause and to sort of ask if there are clarification questions in the audience. No?
Robin's got a hand up.
Yeah, I did have it up. Sorry, I lost track of the official little hand signal thing. Yeah, I'm very interested in these cases of hidden authorship, and I actually must admit I'm interested in them from an evolutionary point of view, actually. And I know you don't really want to talk about that, but so do you think that a creature that isn't capable of ostensive communication ostensive communication, so of producing an informative intention embedded in a communicative intention, as it were, do you think that we humans could hide our intentions, could have this sort of deliberate hiding of an intention if we were not already able to be ostensive, if you see what I mean? And the reason I ask this is because there are certain sort of primate behaviors which look a bit like some of these hidden authorship cases, but which I think are probably not actually quite the same thing.
So I agree with your instincts at the end, that they might look similar, but they're probably not. Christophe might have a slightly different take, but I would agree with your first inference or guess as well, that you're not going to get proper cases of hidden authorship until, this is what you need to explain evolutionarily. And then hidden authorship is a very interesting exploitation of the proper domain. In fact, I think what I'd like to say is that this is the focus. Focus is the wrong word, but this is the selective environment, let's say, for the evolution of ostensive communication. But once you've got it, once you've got this, these embedded layers, these embedded intentions, it opens up this enormous space. And in a moment, we're going to talk about ways in which it's exploited. It makes possible a lot of things that are quite distinctive about humans, including hidden authorship.
Right. So, yes, because it seems like a sophisticated thing to me. And I've often been confused over the years when we've talked in relevance theory about covert communication versus ostensive communication, as if covert communication was somehow or other less complex. But actually, I think it's more complex. And probably we wouldn't be capable of it if we weren't also capable of ostensive communication. So I'm just really pleased to get that clarified.
Yeah, I'm minded to agree with you. Christophe, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I think I have a different opinion. I think that there are plenty of cases of hidden authorship, but hidden authorship is a misnomer here. There are plenty of cases where we have an informative intention without having a communicative intention, and we come naturally with this informative intention of displaying. So when we dress up in the morning, we have an informative intention to look good or to appear sexy or whatever, but we don't have the communicative intention.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. But then we're not. It's not. Isn't that a case of an absence rather than a hiding?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I wanted to emphasize that there are many cases of absent authorship, and I fully agree with you that in non-primate communication, there are good evidence to think that non-human primates do have informative intention. So that means that they have some mind reading capacities, and that they will use these mind reading capacities in order to modify the behavior of others, and without having a communicative intention. So they show, in order to be groomed, they will show their back, and they have this informative intention to bring attention of the other to their back for potential grooming. And most probably they don't have the idea that making manifest their informative intention would help interpretation. And they are right to do that, but not to think that making their informative interpretation would help interpretation, because most probably the audience, on the other audience side, they don't have the presumption of relevance.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, I think what the three of us are saying is all consistent with one another. There are some special cases, but Christophe's quite like hidden authorship. Christophe's quite right to say, I think, that you can have an informative intent without the communicative intent, and that may well be present in other species. So if there's no one else, we're going to move on. Yeah. So hidden authorship, in contrast to the prototypical domain, goes right down here in the bottom corner. Right? You don't make your informative intention manifest, and if you're successful, then the communicative intention is not manifest and therefore cannot play any role in interpretation. Of course, if you're unsuccessful, if you attempt to hide authorship, but the target of your informative intent actually recognizes that you intended to do so, then they might make inferences off the back of the fact that you tried to hide it, and then you might end up in something up in this corner of the space. But successful hidden authorship is going to be down here in the bottom left. It's the same place as just, because it is the same thing from the audience point of view. It's just observing others. It's just seeing things in the world. Right? You just observe others. They don't necessarily have communicative intent. We don't make any inferences about their behavior of the recognition of communicative intent. But then there is, as we say, this big space in between. And we want to ask questions about what's going on here. Now, I think there are interesting things to say about all sorts of domains. We've touched on a few of them. I touched on a few of them in that first slide. Obviously, we're not going to talk about all of these today. In fact, we're going to focus on just one, and that's the teaching case. Maybe in the discussion afterwards, we can talk about some of the others if that's of interest. So in teaching, we can maybe as a first almost naive guess about what teaching is all about, we might just go straight to the top right corner of the space, and we just use ostensive communication in its canonical form. We verbally instruct people. But we can call that naive because, you don't have to engage with the anthropological literature on teaching for very long to realize that teaching comes in many more shapes and sizes than those of us who are quite institutionalized by weird institutions and education environments are used to. There are many forms, and I'm just, okay. So a few examples. So tolerated observation is kind of the other extreme, where the person who is demonstrating the practice or the behavior that is to be learned just repeats it over and over. They don't do anything different. They just repeat it over and over and allow themselves to be watched by the novice, by the learner. Then there are cases where they do more or less the same thing repeatedly, maybe with a little bit more exaggeration, a little bit of exaggeration, or a little bit of idealization of the behavior. But they repeat it over and over. So maybe in those cases, they don't necessarily have a communicative intent in those slight deviations from the standard behavior. Maybe a little bit. Maybe they're showing their communicative intent a little bit. But the audience, because they know they're repeating it, the teacher is repeating the behavior for their benefit, may well make a number of different inferences off the back of that repetition. Each particular case should be studied on its own merit. So it may be the case that one instance of repetition is here, one is down here. We can move around this space. There's also exaggerated demonstration. So if I want to teach you how to tie a knot, I don't necessarily just tie the knot, tightly in my fingers. I might exaggerate some of the movements. I might show you the loop in particular and how it goes through. Those exaggerated demonstrations are, in terminology of relevance theory, ostensive, to some degree at least. They have some significant, the communicative intent is made manifest to some significant degree along here. And then since it's made manifest, maybe it plays some important role in interpretation, in spotting what it is that's important about this particular movement in the creation of a knot, for example. Or maybe not. So maybe it's up here, maybe it's down here. Again, case by case basis. We can move around this space. I'm going to play you a video now. It's about 1.5 minutes long. It's of it's an instructional video of dance, swing dance, partner dance, and it shows all 4 of these types of teaching. There. So the 2 teachers here are moving around this space. So in fact, they're using different parts of the space at the same time. And then I'm going to break down 1 or 2 particular parts which you might not see on the first viewing. But first, this is about 1.5 minutes long. It's just a short video of teaching 1 step. And this is kind of a post-beginner step. It's not quite beginners, it's sort of the next step up.
From this position, we're going to do a rock step and then 2 kick steps. Rock, step, kick, kick.
And
rock,
you can see
step,
that we're
kick,
kicking between the
rock,
legs.
step, kick,
And we're kicking
rock,
low
step, kick,
so as not to hurt anybody.
kick, kick.
We also have a little bit of space between our hips, especially on the rock step. So it kind of looks a little cartoony and a little fun versus other dance styles where you press completely up against each other. You don't want to do that.
Yep. When we do this again, you can see, we'll show you from all the angles, kick, kick, what that footwork looks like when we're offset. Kick, kick. The first kick for me, leaders, with my left foot is to the outside of my partner. And the second kick step with my right foot is in between the legs. Kick. We're going to rotate this around. Kick, kick, and rock, step, kick, kick, and then you can see for Evita, her first kick step after the rock step is between my legs. And the second kick is to the outside. Kick, kick, rock, step, kick, kick, and good. Yeah.
You'll also notice that when we take the rock step, our bodies do kind of go away from each other, and then we stand a bit more upright for the kicks.
Okay, so that's just 1.5 minutes of a pretty standard dance instructional video. And it does show all of those different features I talked about. There's verbal instruction, there's repetition to facilitate observation. There is a bit of exaggeration, and I'm going to talk a bit about that in a moment. And they're, as I say, doing things at different times. Competent teachers move around this space in very dynamic ways. Okay, here's the exaggeration. So they show the same step over and over again. And as you would have seen, they rotate, so you can see it from 4 different angles. And at the beginning, the leader is facing the camera, the follower, Vita, she has her back to the camera. And they rotate side on. And they only do 1 complete step from this side on position. So this is, they're still on the left-hand side here, they're still rotating. And then when they come side on, so you can now see the step from a different angle, they actually exaggerate the step back with the hips. Now this, you might not see this if you're not a swing dancer, but for this audience, for this post-beginner audience who are just getting used to the dance style itself, this is salient. This is the right level of salience of the, they're making their communicative intent manifest to the degree that they need to. It's there, you can see it if you want, but they don't verbally draw attention to it. And then when they continue the rotation, they go back to that slightly simplified, not quite exactly as they would do it, in real life, so to speak, but that's slightly simplified version. I'm just going to show you 5 seconds of that video again. So these 5 seconds where they rotate around, and you'll see this exaggeration just when they go side on. Oh, excuse me, they go further point to here. So Evita emphasizes that angle at the end of the video. Interestingly, the angles of her arms are exactly the same as the ones that they use when they actually do the step. So here's those 5 seconds again. So they're still rotating here, and that's kind of the normal one. And now they're side on, bam, more exaggerated this time. And then they go back to rotating further, and they go back to that more simplified version. So when they've got the angle, when this is what you can see, then they use a little bit of exaggeration, not bringing any special attention to it, but they're moving around this space. They're adding in a bit more manifestness. They're making their communicative intent a bit more manifest as and when necessary. And then the audience, well, they can, if they spot it, then maybe that contributes to their interpretation. Maybe they spot it, but they already know this, so that it doesn't need to contribute to their interpretation. So the audience might bring this case up and down here as they need. So this brings me to an important question that's kind of in a way central to this central to relevance theory, I think, and to understanding this space as a whole. What about optimality? So central to relevance theory is this communicative principle of relevance. Every ostensive stimulus carries a presumption of its own optimal relevance. That principle is developed, with what's in mind are the prototypical cases. Language use most obviously. And that's the central claim. What's going on in the rest of the space in terms of optimality? What we'd like to suggest is that what teachers aim to do is indeed to be optimal, to make their informative intentions manifest to whatever extent is necessary. Now, it's important to point out here, aim to is important because teaching is itself a skill. So moving around this space, moving along this axis in a competent way is itself a skill that some people have acquired to a greater extent than others. So an incompetent teacher, so to speak, may not make something manifest that they should. So that's one of their informative intentions manifest. Or they may make one of their informative intentions far too manifest and spend far too long, making that manifest and becoming irrelevant in the process. So competent teachers make informative intentions manifest to the extent that they believe is useful for their audience. There are also important things to say about learners here. I'm not going to say anything right now, although Christophe might want to later on. Yeah, this is what Michael and Evita are doing in that case I drew attention to. In any case, anywhere on this axis except at the end where there's no manifestness of the informative intent, audience presumptions of relevance, the audience side of relevance theory still apply. So the audience can make an inference, oh, they've made that informative intention manifest. They've done it to the degree that they think is necessary. And I'm going to presume that they're being relevant, and then the learning can actually take place. Let me make a link here with research done in our department here in Central European University, not in the lab that Christophe and I are involved in, but in the lab next door, the Social Mind and Body Lab, sometimes called the Joint Action Lab, or sometimes more humorously, the lab that studies how people lift up tables together, how they do things in joint action. They do some work on teaching. It's very idealized, experimental, very simplified context. But what they find is that teachers indeed move along this space, make their informative intentions manifest. Or I think it's fair to interpret their data as showing that teachers make their informative intentions manifest to the degrees that they need to, and indeed the audiences presume relevance off the back of that. I think that's the direction that research is going. So yeah, that should already be there. Yeah. So, and I can be. I think I've got a bullet point here. Something Christophe told me I had to say, and he's right. And it's something I sometimes forget to say. So when we say teachers aim to make their informative intentions manifest to whatever extent it's useful, even more precisely, we mean teachers maximize the probability of satisfying their informative intent at minimal cost for themselves and for the learner. Okay, there's much more to be said. We could talk about perhaps punishment or even art or other cases that there's all sorts of domains, as I suggested earlier. The headline point, we want to suggest that there is on the surface massive diversity in human interaction and human communication and interaction more broadly. Often these phenomena are studied in quite diverse literatures with diverse range of theories and approaches. And that's good, we know a great deal. But we think there's also some unity underneath, and it's worth pointing out that unity. It's an important observation in its own right, and it is very important for understanding the evolutionary origins of these behaviors, many of which are distinctive of our species. I think, 20 minutes left for discussion, so I'm really hopeful. You can help us enrich our paper, which we are, we're revising at the moment, and definitely open to comments and enrichments.
Thank you. It was very, very interesting. Do you have comments, questions? Maybe just wait till it sinks in, and then we will come out with all the questions.
I'm getting my applauses muddled up with my hand raising again. So I thought there were a few questions, but it's just applauses.
I suppose, like, while people are putting together comments and questions, could I ask a stupid question?
Not a stupid, whatever it is, it's not a stupid question.
How could a teacher decide to what extent is the useful extent to make it manifest? And I think if it is a teacher, if they know, like, their classroom, but then a lot of the communication that takes place recently is online. We don't know who our audience is and so on. So just wondered what kind of mechanism do we have to assess to what extent we have to make informative intention manifest?
Yeah, I don't have a detailed answer to that question, right? So Christophe may well have more to say. All I have to say is it's a skill. So teachers do get it wrong, like commonly. We teach. We all know what it's like, and sometimes we don't quite hit the right spot. I think central claim of relevance theory that humans tend to hit the right spot in those canonical, just standard one-to-one interaction. Right, we tend to be optimally relevant.
Yeah.
Doing it in cases where you only need to make your communicative intent manifest to a different degree, that isn't so straightforward. That's not part of the ordinarily developing human cognitive phenotype. It's a skill. We can become good at it, but it's not always the case. Maybe Christophe wants to enrich my answer.
Yes, that's definitely not a stupid question. In fact, Thom and I, we think that it's a fruitful research program to investigate to what extent people are really able to see how manifest they need to make their informative intention. So there are some insights already that Thom mentioned, coming from our lab on joint action. It's not so much on teaching, but it's on joint action. So one of the things, also on teaching. So one of the study is about teaching how to perform a piece of music. And there is, as in Thom's example, exaggeration. Now, exaggeration, you can really make it so strong that the informative intention is obvious. That you make the bodies, your buttock in the dancing example, you make your buttock so far apart that, of course, there is an informative intention. Otherwise, they would never do such a thing. But there is a trade-off, because if you make this informative intention more manifest, then you need to depart from the optimal behavior, which is to have your body apart, but sufficiently, not too much, not too little, but at the right angle. So how much exaggeration should there be? So in fact, I think that your question can be translated in how much exaggeration should there be in this type of teaching example. And the hypothesis is that we're pretty good at making exactly the right level of exaggeration.
I'm going to enrich that even a little bit further. So you know, in a way, it's a multi-step question. First, what's the right amount such that the audience will actually grasp the target behavior, right? So if you do no exaggeration, they don't, you know, this is what they do in the zombie lab with, you know, playing a musical piece with a hammer in one example, playing a xylophone. What's the amount of exaggeration such that the audience will actually grasp the tune? And then independently, you get teachers to try and play just normally, and then try and teach, and you measure how much exaggeration they produce. The question is that amount of exaggeration the same amount as what the audience actually independently measured, what the audience actually needs to acquire the skill? And you know, I don't actually think that all the detailed particular studies and sub-studies have been done, but I do think the research, the findings are pointing in the direction that, at least in those simplified cases, people are pretty good.
Thank you.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah. It's really, really interesting. I think we got Robin has hands up there.
Yeah, thank you. That was indeed extremely interesting. I'm just trying to understand better than I immediately did the graphs that you put up with production on the x-axis and interpretation on the y-axis. And so the production part of that is the degree to which the speaker makes the informative intention manifest. Is that right?
I think so. I'm going to double check because Christophe's nodding, so he's faster than me.
Yes, absolutely.
I always have to make sure I get the exact right wording. So yeah, I've got it all here. Here we go.
Okay, anyway, Christophe says I got that right, so that's good. Now the interpretation axis then is the degree to which the audience, the recognition of the informative intention of the audience is involved. Yeah,
plays a role in deriving it.
Plays a role, yeah. Okay, so then so what interested me really, well, the whole thing interested me, but what was striking about the dance example was that there was a huge amount of constant verbal, I don't know whether verbal instruction, yeah, probably verbal instruction or verbal description of what they were doing, which was going on at the same time. And so it seemed that there was exaggerated demonstration, there was repetition, a lot of repetition, and verbal instruction, all of which are positioned at different places in the space of the graph. So, so when you position them in these different ways, you're maintaining that there are differences in the, as it were, the role of the informative intention for the different parts of this. So for the exaggerated demonstration and for the repetition. So, I mean, the repetition quite interested me because it was low down, it was low down, if I remember. Maybe you could go to the next slide or two where you position them?
It's worth stressing. These are, this is what you want.
I know, and I'm not really trying to pin you down in a nasty way. I just want to understand it. Understand it better. So you've got repetition there. So that's not very far along the x-axis. So that means typically, I mean, I know you want some leeway here. Of course, I understand why. But typically, the repetition, I guess, of the action, of the demonstration, doesn't come with with the making of highly manifest of an informative intention, but it's quite high up on the interpretation axis, and therefore it would seem that on the part of the audience, recognizing the informative intention is playing an important role. Is that right? So you're going to get these, I mean, and it's probably absolutely fine. I've just got to get my mind around it. These sort of big differences between really the what the speaker's up to on the one hand, if you like, or the producer is up to, and what the interpreter is up to with regard to the informative intention.
That is exactly right. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
So, I mean, thank you for giving us the leeway, because it's very important, right? So some learners, some learners, they know what they're looking for. They don't need the informative intention to be manifest at all. They just need to see the thing, right? And so they might be down here. But some learners, oh, they're trying to draw my attention to that in particular. Now I see it, and they're gonna, and that really helps them, and they're going to be higher up, right? So everything is case by case, but in a very first approximation, rough guess, just repetition is somewhere around here for the reasons you get.
But it's like there's sort of mismatches, aren't there? So even when a speaker is not, a producer is not intent on making highly manifest and informative intention, nevertheless, it's going to be, as in the repetition case, as pictured here, it's going to be highly important to the interpreter to recognize that there is an informative intention. And that's kind of interesting. I mean, I haven't seen that discussed really before, I don't think, that there is this sort of mismatch situation.
Yeah.
So that's, thank you, that's that's new and interesting.
There's loads more to say. This, as I say, it's just, we are thinking this through at the moment, but we do think that this whole space can be exploited. There are real world cases of human interaction at all parts of this space.
How important do you think the verbal instruction was in the dance case?
Oh, I mean, I think, now I'm not speaking as a relevance theorist or scientist, but as a dancer and sometimes dance teacher. I think it's mostly to, it's like radio. So when people produce radio broadcasts, you're told not to produce dead air. And I think it's similar in that case. It's just a less interesting video. So I think what's most important is the visuals. In that particular case I showed you. You're quite right to say, yeah, you kept talking. But I don't think you needed to so much. But what you did need to do is to make sure that there's something continuous going on there for the learner.
I think that ethnographic data shows that our societies are especially keen to include verbal instruction, and that might not be so central to other modes of teaching.
That's a good point, right? And the target audience for this video is a weird audience who have been institutionalized to teaching and so on. So that's why it makes it good.
Thank you.
See some more hands up. So Brandis, you got hands up there.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay, let me just say first that maybe you mentioned some important pieces of information that I missed. My internet connection is not the most stable of internet connections. So that was very interesting. I thought all of this was very interesting. There is a question that I would like to ask. So you've got this, it seems that you've got this categorization, this detailed categorization of authorship. So you've got hidden authorship, absent authorship, and so on and so forth, correct? My question is, how many of these categories should be included in the scope of linguistic pragmatics? In the case of absent authorship, for example, where you have informative intention but not communicative intention, there is no stimulus. If there is no stimulus, there is no sign. If there is no sign, that means that there's nothing for me to interpret. Of course, it's not communication proper. So that we're talking about a thought that basically you have the informative intention, but that's just a thought that remains unarticulated in your head. Okay, but in that case, it's just a thought in your conceptual world. Okay, what happens there? Do you really have linguistic pragmatics there? You have no natural, you don't really have a non-natural, a conventional sign. It's just a thought. It's just cognitive linguistics there. Do we really have the involvement of linguistic pragmatics? That's basically my question. Should we worry about all these categories as you know, pragmatics researchers?
So I suspect that Christophe and I both have things to say. Do you want me? Shall I go first? Do you want to go first, Christophe? Or? No,
You go first.
You go first. Okay. So we, on the one hand, we don't want to do one thing suggested, but we do want to do another. So we don't want to just go inside their head. So informative intentions are intentions about other minds, right? And we are talking about cases where there are informative intentions are present. The communicative intention, the making manifest of an informative intention, may be more or less present. In the extreme case, as you pointed out, we get hidden authorship, no manifestness of the information, but there is still an informative intention. I still want, you know, my host to know that my wine glass is empty. So we don't want to keep it inside the head. That said, we do think that the domain of cognitive pragmatics should be as broad as to include all the different ways in which humans attempt to satisfy informative intentions. The most salient, arguably the most important in human life, are the cases that are already studied by pragmatics in linguistics. But we do it in all sorts of other ways. So teaching is one example, non-verbal teaching included, you know, and many others, as I've alluded to at the beginning and the end. So the domain, potentially cognitive pragmatics, the, you know, affecting other minds through making manifest informative intentions, is enormous as a discipline. I think it's the, you know, foundation of a great deal of what is distinctive about our species. And I think we should claim that for ourselves as cognitive pragmaticists. All the different ways in which humans express and try to satisfy their informative intentions fall within the domain of cognitive pragmatics. I think that's what we want to say, right, Christophe?
Yes, but I want to say it again.
Okay.
So just to I want to repeat what Thom said, but with new words. So when people have an informative intention, they will produce stimuli to be observed by the audience. So it is about producing stimuli. And informative intention is a mental state that motivates a behavior. Now, when what we want to point out is that the type of stimuli that people will produce when they have an informative intention, the type of behavior motivated by their informative intention, includes several types of evidence. Some evidence will be evidence about informative intention. So when I talk, I just give evidence about what I have about my informative intention. But some evidence, when we show, are not communicative evidence. They are not about my informative intention. They are about the content of my informative intention. So when I do a dancing demonstration, I show the move and I show the move directly. You perceive this. There are evidence for you to know how to dance. You perceive them without having to process my informative intention. So the research program is how do people play with this communicative evidence and non-communicative evidence. They produce both at the same time in a subtle way, weighting the role of each. That's where the continuum is about.
Okay, so Billy got hand up. I thought you turning on the camera is your communicative intention to ask questions anyway. So
exactly, and that's actually one thing I was going to speak about. Can I check my mic's working? Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good, thanks. It's hard to ask a question because so many different complicated thoughts are going on in my mind, but I'll kind of cut to the chase and say what I'm interested in is to what extent there's a clear switching on of a comprehension heuristic or a production heuristic, and to what extent we say things are kind of, maybe I'm kind of communicating, maybe not. And one of the things I'm thinking about all the practical implications for understanding pragmatics, but also for understanding teaching, for understanding behavior in meetings. And, you know, When Ryoko said, I saw you put your camera on, I was thinking as I put it on, I wonder if she'll think he's trying to communicate. And I'm also thinking about how we all vary. So to what extent, as we're on the screen, do we think it's important to be smiling and nodding? Or can we sit here looking grumpy? And will people think we mean it? And somebody shook their head. Are they saying no to the question I'm asking, or are they saying yes to the thing I'm negating, or whatever? But what I'm thinking is, as I'm in a room, to the extent we're in a room now, there are various things we're all doing. And to what extent is each of those little things an act of communication or not? Because when you introduce pragmatics, I have tended in the past to make it sound like a switch on. You know, I'm watching people and I'm just wondering what they're doing. Sometimes they do something and it switches on my different kind of interpretation procedure. So yeah, so I think I'm asking about do you switch it on and off, or can it be to varying degrees?
So I guess Christophe's going to be happy if I go first again, and then he can go second. So I think I've got two things to say. The first is, you know, what you're pointing at are questions that ethnographers have been asking for a great many years. And in some ways, the only thing we're trying to do is to provide those cognitive, cognitive ways of approaching those questions. So that's, you know, that's the very broad meta, almost meta. And as for switching on, I mean, if what you mean is, you know, one way to interpret your question, you can tell me if this is fair or not. Are audience presumptions of relevance triggered necessarily and to the same extent, even in the non-canonical cases? And I think I want to say yes. So, you know, I might only make my communicative intention manifest to, you know, a small degree. Excuse me, I mean, my informative intention manifest only to a certain degree. But as long as it's manifest to some degree, that license is a presumption of relevance. And that presumption of relevance, I guess, I think this is an interesting question, takes account of the fact that the informative intention was made manifest to that degree and not to that degree. As Christophe was pointing out earlier, you don't over-exaggerate, you just do it to the degree that you need to. So, you know, potentially, you know, these switches are going on and off, and they're turning on things that are subtle and graded all over the place in human interaction.
Okay. Can I come back before Christophe comes in? I mean, what I'm thinking about is one of the things for me in teaching pragmatics is I used to treat things as simple because I thought start was simple. And now first year students, I show them real interaction and make them notice the millions of things going on so that before we get simple, we'll be aware of everything. And so we're thinking about how everything I'm doing right now could or could not be informative to a certain degree or not. And I'm just wondering how we deal with that. So I made a note ethnography. I thought I've got to think about this because in a way, the ethnographers are the people who look at the rich data, aren't they? They don't start by simplifying.
I would love to see how you start those sessions. You know, what videos you use to just say, look, there's this.
Well, I've been using a Seinfeld clip recently.
Okay, right, yeah. I think you're completely right. If you actually watch with a critical eye, it's so much and there's so many layers, and yet the people are fluent and competent. They are navigating that space.
Yeah.
You know,
and we pick up on things really quickly, like you notice that somebody's not happy with what you're saying instantly, or that you're not giving the answer they want or whatever.
Yeah.
So my follow-up, I guess, is there a possibility that things are kind of always on? Because you're always interpreting and you're always behaving. And so is the presumption of optimal relevance, you know what I mean? Am I just looking at people and then suddenly a little bit of it kicks into that bit of the behavior? Does that make sense? I don't know.
Humans are always in the world and there are nearly always people around them.
Yeah.
So that, you know, the cognitive principle of relevance says, you know, that the cognitive system is geared towards the maximization of relevance, and in human societies, other people are very relevant. The presumption of relevance, though, only occurs when there is ostensive behavior of some sort. Right?
I mean, one reason, just to chuck in another thing, is one reason I'm thinking about this is because I've been working on the idea about production with my PhD student Q, and we get asked, when does your production heuristic kick in? And once you start thinking about it, well, like you say, we're always in the world. We're always thinking about people, and we're always thinking about things we might do. So do we want to differentiate general planning from something very local and specific? And then the same question for the interpretation.
Yeah, I think the production side is quite a deep, difficult problem. So relevance theory has a comprehension heuristic. I don't see a production heuristic, and I would love to, but I find the question hard to start thinking about. I don't know if Robin has anything to say about that in particular, about production. No, right. So it's a hard question, and I don't know the answer.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm a bit less convinced than Thom that the presumption of relevance is everywhere. I think that in many cases, people, even when they want to convey information, they bet on the fact that the audience will pick up relevant information because it's a good bet to make. So when you make a demonstration, people will, in many cases, people will pick up the relevant information because they know that it is a relevant information. You don't have to trigger a relevant information. They are already looking for relevant information. So I'm just saying the same thing, but pulling also in the other direction that we can do a lot. We can satisfy many informative intentions without making them manifest.
Sorry, I should have unmuted to say thanks. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, I wish we had more time, but unfortunately we got to have 6. And thank you very much for really, really super interesting talk. And thank you very much for all the questions and comments and so on. I think this was a perfect way to end our season 1. And looking forward to seeing you in September. It will be the last Wednesday of each month again, starting at 5:30. Time might change here and there, but we will send out my annoying email yet again sometime in September. So looking forward to seeing you in September, and have a great summer.
You too. Thank you very much.